Tough to do a global event and try and figure out where everybody is, but I want to say hello to everybody and welcome to our Saturday show. Thank you everybody for tuning in and joining us. I think we have a cool event here today, and I just want to open with a couple of things for anyone that's new to joining us and hasn't been with us through the week. We got a couple of things going. We got some protocol going. We got some assignments for you, really. So first things first, if you have a question for Peff, for Kurt, throw the word question, all caps, in front of your question, and it'll help me as I'm looking at the chat to kind of see what's up. I love the discussions to go on in there, so talk to each other, throw things back and forth, but if you have a question specifically for Kurt, or myself, but really for Kurt, throw question, all caps at the front of that. And the other thing is, we came up with this idea through the week that it's Music Making Month, so we should really be making music. And what a cooler way to make some music and get it out there than to have it played during Music Making Month. Makes sense? So here's what we've come up with. Put your music up on SoundCloud, tweet us a link to it, post us a link to it on our Facebook page. That would be facebook.com/propellerhead. Or if you want to tweet it, our handle is propellerheadsw, like software, SW. And we'll check them out. If you're going to tweet it, we have a hashtag. It's #MMMPropSongs. And we'll check them out. We'll open the show. You saw I opened that show with today's show with a song called Grimy Green. So thanks for sending that in to us, and keep them coming. All right, so I'm going to take a backseat today and let your instructor be Kurt Kurosaki. You may have read his books. If you haven't, you should read his books. They are some of the best, not just Reason tutorial books, but just general synth theory and audio production. I mean, the guy knows his stuff. So, I'm happy to welcome him here. Kurt, say hello to the world.
Oh, hello, world. You don't have to take a back seat, Ryan. We can keep going. I can hear you fine on this end, and I would appreciate you just passing on questions as we're going along here, because I have no idea. It's like staring at my screen and talking to a PowerPoint presentation is kind of weird. So just so I know that someone's out there.
I'm out here. I'll be keeping my eye on things.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about control voltages today, which is a little more interesting than it sounds. I mean, these are
just a quick. I'm gonna pause you for a second, Kurt. We're getting a couple comments in the comments in the chat room that we've got a little too much signal on your mic there.
And you wanted me to pull out the big condenser for this. How is that? Is that better?
Let me see.
Okay.
It might still be a little bit hot.
And we're talking about control voltages today, and I've got a little presentation here for you guys to help you kind of help illustrate some of the principles that are going on with control voltages and Reason. And what's cool about this is you can actually apply these to analog systems as well. I mean, the principles of control voltages stay the same in both Reason as well as the electronic world. So, if you can pick up a few ideas here, chances are you could probably head over to your friend's modular system and have a pretty good understanding of how to patch chords together. How are those levels?
They're better.
Alan? Okay. So, getting started here. Control voltage basics. there's three things to kind of understand, and I've tried to break this down in a way for those of you guys who've never patched control voltages in Reason or on a hardware synth. And the three things are, just basically understanding what control voltages are, understanding what they look like, what their behaviors are, and then the application of control voltage. How can you use CVs to make your music better? Because this is Propellerhead Software's Music Making Month. And, while it doesn't sound like, you can go down to one of two paths. You can go down this very esoteric, trippy, experimental way of using control voltages, or there are some very practical applications which you can use towards electronic music production. Okay. So, getting started here, control voltages, they originate from analog synthesizers, and Propellerhead Software, when they were developing Reason, they too are synth geeks, and they thought, how cool would it be, we're doing this whole cabling system, how cool would it be if we took this old style of analog modular patching and applied it into the software? And so this term control voltage, derives from hardware electronics. So in the photo, you can see a picture of this modular system. This is the Buchla 200E, and you'll see all these cables
coming in from the chat room, which is actually a reasonable question. Is Reason the only app that has CV that mimics this vintage thing?
Well, the idea of patching is not exclusive to Propellerhead Software products. Let me put it to you that way, diplomatically. There are other programs which have similar features that start with an R. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. All right. So when you look at this picture, some of these cables are control voltages, and then some of them are audio cables. And that's one of the things I try to explain to people so that they understand that control voltages and audio signals are two different systems within a modular system, or a modular synth. And then here, side by side, as you can see, there is the close-up of the Buchla on the right, and then a screenshot. And there you can pretty much see the similarities between the two. Here we have all these crazy wires going from module to module, and it doesn't matter which picture you're looking at, but you see just a bunch of crazy wires going between devices. And so I try to use this, I put this up to help illustrate the fact that, you can sort of, you can use Reason in this way that is non-traditional, a little more esoteric. And one of the neat parts is that it becomes, there's some tremendously powerful shortcuts that you can achieve using control voltages that you couldn't do necessarily with the sequencer and the standard uses of Reason. So here I've got a block diagram kind of breaking down how a synthesizer functions, or a modular synthesizer. On the top row, you have oscillator, filter, amplifier, your standard signal processors. And those are generally audio modules. And then on the lower, in the yellow boxes, we have what I've designated as control voltage modules. You have your keyboard, you have your envelope generators, and then this kind of gives you an overview of the fact that control voltage modules are distinct from audio modules. The control voltage modules, you have to remember, they don't actually generate sounds themselves. They control the other modules which are doing sound processing. So like you have your keyboard, it sends a control voltage to the oscillator to control the pitch, or the envelope generator sends a control voltage to the amplifier, which controls the loudness. And in general, that's one thing to remember, is that a control voltage is a signal that will change pitch, loudness, or tone. And then control voltages are also used to trigger other events like notes or drum hits. And as like a definition here, an active control voltage routing, meaning a control voltage source connected to a control voltage device, is called a modulation. So if you have an LFO going to a filter cutoff, they call it a filter cutoff modulation, or an LFO modulating a filter cutoff. And then all active modulations, you have to have that connection. You have to have that cable patched between the two devices.
All right. Now, I think there's a Mo Grizzly on the chat has captured sometimes my feeling about CV, which is this. Sometimes this starts to feel why we don't use CV, because it's modulates this and a pitch into that goes to the gate, and it starts to overwhelm us. So is there an easy way to sort of dip our toes into the CV water, or to think, even just to think about it?
Right. That's one of the reasons why I put that word up there, because how many different musical ways can we use the word modulation, right? There's the compositional reference to modulation. Then there's the synthesizer, like what we're talking about here, control voltage modulations. Let's not even worry about that. Like I said, I'm putting these words up just so that you have a basic understanding of the terminology themselves.
Cool.
So that when you hear someone talking about modulation, you'll be able to understand it a little bit better when they specifically talk about, when they use that word modulate or modulation or something modulating something, you will understand that that's how it's defined. It's a control voltage source affecting some kind of device, some target device. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, actually. And I think it will make more and more sense as we go.
It's semantics, tomato. It's not crucial. What's more important is that you understand what's going on with these signals and how they're affecting things in your rack.
Gotcha.
We can skip over this one. It's basically the same. Reason simulates a CV routing feature of analog modular systems. Like I said, the propeller heads were synth geeks, and being the cool geeks that they are, they put this feature in Reason, and it's here for us to use. And I apologize about that damn rooster in the background, if you can hear it. Ryan's been to my house. He knows how bad it can get up here.
Oh, yeah, and at sundown, that's what I learned. Don't try and film a video with Peff at sundown, because unless you want roosters on it, then it's the perfect time.
Right. I need, rooster cancellation technology up here.
We'll get on that, Kurt.
Yeah, have Peff work on it. So let's take a look at the Reason rack here quickly. And I've got this Reason song file here. And in this rack, I've got all of the devices which generate and control voltages, or that have control voltage outputs. And it's pretty easy to recognize the difference between outputs and inputs, is because they usually say out. Like here it says CV out, right? Or up here it says auto CV output on the Scream 4. On the Maelstrom, you have 3 sockets, outputs. And the only one that doesn't say output is the Matrix. It just says you have 3 CV sockets here. These are the tiny sockets.
Is there a reason for that, Kurt, that it doesn't say it? Is it because it's only output?
It's only output. I mean, the Matrix is the only device that has that's exclusively designed to generate CVs. Well, that and the RPG-8. But even on the RPG-8, they have input sockets as well as outputs. So it was just a funny thing that I was going through this and preparing, and I just noticed, hey, there's no output designated on the Matrix. So this list of devices, basically, if it says, unless it says output or Matrix, then the device can create CV signals. So Matrix, RPG-8, subtractor, and N19 read drum Dr. Octorex, Kong, Maelstrom. And I put this list up because, there's some people who think they have to go through and know exactly what every socket is doing on the back of the rack. And really, it's not necessary. It's more important to understand the general principles of different types of control voltage generators. So instead of going through this list or going through the rack and trying to remember, oh, here we've got this, and this, it tells you what the control voltages do. It says mod A out, mod B out, filter envelope out, and then these possible destinations. And of course, the basic connections are you just click and drag, and you can start patching in a modular way.
Kurt, is there an easy way? I know in my early playing around, I sometimes didn't know what goes to what. Like there's an output can only go to an input, and an input can only go to an output. Is that the general rule?
That's the general. I actually have another list that shows all the inputs or devices with inputs, but that'll come down the road here. So it's kind of easy. If you look at the list here, we only have 15 devices, which you have to remember can create CV signals. But let's, moving on here, before I get on, were there any questions?
Binary Monkey wants to know what devices don't have CV inputs. There are actually quite a few devices which don't have CV inputs, but that doesn't mean you can't control them by CVs, which I'll get into a little bit later. Okay. So the idea behind these next few slides is to give you a better idea. Again, understanding the language, knowing what a control voltage, when they say like a gate control voltage or a note control voltage or an LFO control voltage, there are different types. And the one thing to remember, like with analog synths, is that, a voltage is a voltage. There is no differentiation between one type of control voltage to another type. What's different is how the voltages behave. And so this is how we get into these different classifications. So that's why I put up I did these little illustrations of the different behaviors. So the first one here is a gate control voltage. Sometimes it's called a trig or trigger CV. And what it is a little pulse. And if you can picture like a light switch, all you're doing is turning the light switch on, flipping it off. Just momentarily. So you turn it on, turn it off. That's your pulse. Interesting.
Okay. And then,
so it doesn't even have duration.
It does have a duration, but the duration is variable.
Okay.
It depends on different devices, but the main thing is I don't want people to understand that it is an on and an off. It's not really an on and stay on type of situation. Right.
Gotcha.
Which is what the next one would be. Which would be
this may be it may be in a more advanced question for a later part of the session, but I will ask it now, and if we put it off, that's fine. Jonosaurus
Sure.
wants to know, is it possible to apply regroove to a CV gate out?
Yes. Yes, it's possible.
That sounds like a yes with a but.
No, I mean it's possible.
Okay.
There's no. If I go back to this slide here about devices that generate CV signals, RPG8 is number 2, and one of the things about the RPG8 is that if you switch the arpeggiator off, it becomes a MIDI to control voltage converter. So you can send MIDI notes from your sequencer track into an RPG8, and then from there you can send the control voltages out to other devices. So yeah, that was a little bit more advanced, but hope that answers your question. All right, John? Next one, note CVs. main characteristic about CVs is that they are fixed values. So they can be different what's the word? Different values. And the idea behind it is that you have each of these keys on the keyboard, and it's like assigning each one a number from 1 through 128 or 1 through 127. So sometimes you'll see the MIDI notes represented as numbers, and control voltages in Reason work the same way. It's that each key would have a different value. Okay, and then LFOs. The thing about LFOs are that they change periodically, and like you can see this illustration of a sine wave up, and then it crosses the zero crossing, goes down and up. But then it's not really a fair representation, because this would be a continuous sine wave. It's not just once. So if you can picture that just going endlessly, that's what an LFO looks like. And the devices I have listed here: Subtractor, NN19, Maelstrom, Thor, Dr. Octorex. Those are all the devices primarily that you would use to generate an LFO. So basically with an LFO, you can make anything wobble. Or going back to the question about terminology, a lot of people use that term wobble now. I still like to think of it in terms of the technical definition. It's a triangle wave modulation of amplitude, or triangle wave modulation of filter cutoff frequency, or you could just say wobble. So again, it's the semantics.
There's a question from Airnox. I can't say I even understand it, but I'm a bit of a CV tard. It says LFO CV is always a sinus signal, or this can be every periodical signal?
Any periodical signal.
Okay.
Yeah, the question, yeah, like I said, I only put this illustration up here just to give people an idea of the nature of an LFO. I mean, Subtractor doesn't even have a sinusoidal waveform. It only has triangle. That would be the closest waveform. Only Thor and Maelstrom actually have this type of waveform that it can generate.
Gotcha. Merkman says you should be a university professor.
Thanks.
You kind of are.
I was for a little bit. Oh, I'm on sabbatical now. I was teaching Reason for Berkeley Online, teaching the Producing Music with Reason course. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Okay, envelope generator. I think this one for beginners it tends to be one of the more esoteric and more difficult to understand types of control voltage forms. The thing about envelopes, one way to think of it is like it's a lazy gate. You know how a gate is like instantly on, instantly off. Well, envelopes are more like slackers. They'll come on in a little bit, and then they won't have the staying power, and they just kind of fall off really quickly. But they're still on, and then eventually they'll die out.
I like it. Slacker gates.
Slacker gates.
Nice.
Gates are fast on and off. Envelopes kind of slow.
I'm picturing that like sort of teenager, like, you're not the boss of me.
Something. Yeah. So the other thing to remember is that the values are fixed, but it's just you can adjust how quickly they come on or how quickly they go off. So, or just think of it, like I said, slacker gates. They're kind of slow, but they do go on and they do go off. But just depends on how quickly you want them to react. And most of these are all parameters in the Reason synthesizers and the samplers, and we're able to. And I'll actually show you. This is one of the things I'm going to highlight later on here. And I think the last one is the curve CV. Bear in mind that these are not all of the different control voltage behaviors. There's, but these are just some of the general ones that you can create with the different devices. Curve CV, this is primarily generated from the step sequencers, like the Matrix or the Thor step sequencer. And what you can do is you can go and program the different values, so, and they'll repeat on every measure or every two measures, however you set the duration of your pattern sequencer. And then the last thing to notice before I move on here is that control voltages have polarity. So some you'll see, like there's like, I'm not sure if that's coming through or not, Ryan, but there's a gray line in the middle of this little waveform, and that's kind of the zero crossing. So sometimes the waveforms sit above that line, and then sometimes they go above and below. So the ones that are above only, those are positive only, we call them unipolar control voltages. The ones that are both positive and negative, we call bipolar, because you never know what they're going to do next. So, so now I'm going to show you guys a way to kind of visualize control voltages in Reason here. Let me switch back. And what we do is we'll use the BV512 vocoder, because that actually acts as a control voltage monitor. Or we can wire in a control voltage into the bands, and then the bands on the vocoder will rise and fall so we can actually see what's going on. So let's switch this down to 4 bands, and then I'm just going to create, we'll just start with the subtractor here. And here's the LFO section, and I've got it set to a triangle wave, and there's the rate. And so here we'll go, we'll connect the LFO1 modulation output into one of the bands. Let's slow it down a bit. And then there you can see the rising and the falling of the LFO.
Now that looks like we're only seeing the top portion of a bipolar wave. Is that true?
That is correct, Ryan. Very observant. So that brings up another issue here, because the vocoder it only responds to unipolar signals, meaning that it will only see the top half or the positive phase of the waveform. There is a way around this, and we're going to use a spider. Let me just disconnect this all. So I'm going to take the LFO and connect that into a spider splitter. Then take one of the split taps, we'll connect that into band 1. And then the spider acts, has this feature which will flip the polarity of a control voltage. So we'll take this, and that's this output 4, and it says INB, inverse, and we'll connect that into socket 2. So now on socket 1, or on band 1, we see the positive part of the waveform. And on band 2, we see the negative part of the waveform. How's that coming through?
Yeah, it's totally coming through. It's pretty cool, actually.
Okay. So now we can go through here and we can select different waveforms. Like here's the ramp. And you can see it is bipolar. It's got a negative phase and a positive phase, and then drops. Then the inverse. And then the square wave, which will be basically flip-flops between 1 and 2. And then we have a couple of random waveforms on the LFO. One is stepped, and then one is smooth.
When you're starting out, Kurt, would you actually keep this sort of wiring in place to essentially monitor what you're doing to the devices?
Actually, sometimes I will go through and I'll use this to troubleshoot in case I'm not exactly clear of what's going on with a certain control voltage. Like say like if when Thor came out, we had a whole new series of waveforms introduced with Thor. Right. So here we're looking at LFO2, and it's got sine, triangle, square, ramp. So let's I'll point this one out. We'll use the triangle waveform here, and let me connect this from there to the LFO2 output. All right, so let's close that up, close that, slow this down. So there we have the, there you can see our triangle wave going up and down. One of the things that you can't really tell on this is that the behavior is backwards. It actually falls and then rises. Of course, we could tempo sync it. Or let's go through here and look at some of these other ones, like this staircase waveform. From that little image, it's hard to tell that there's actually a negative modulation coming off the staircase and then a positive modulation. So yeah, it becomes a way of just understanding and getting a better idea of the different behaviors. Again, control voltage is a control voltage. We can stick anything in here. We can go and connect a matrix, we can connect envelope generators or whatever, and then it'll just give us a way of visualizing what's going on. And I've actually created, let's see here, a little analyzer combinator patch. That's not it. Let's close this out. Here we go. So this one, I've got the vocoder set up along with that. In that same way, I've got the splitter taking the input signal and inverting it and then routing it to two different bands on the vocoder. But I also have this set up to modulate these digital delay lines. And they're not actually used for delays. All I'm doing is scaling the numbers so I can actually see the relative control voltage value. So let me close this one. So on this one on the left here, that's the positive phase value. And then the one on the right is the negative phase value. And so not only do I have this visual representation of the bars rising and falling, I also have this numeric output.
I see, but that's still a diagnostic tool?
Yeah, that's purely, it's not really an effect. It's not really musical. It's just a learning aid for myself.
That is really cool.
And then
you know what, Kurt? Is this this combinator patch, is that something you could put up on Peff.com potentially for people that they could kind of get this just diagnostic toolbox?
I actually put all the files up already.
You're so clever.
On Facebook. If you guys want to go and let me know when that's coming up here. Sorry, I'm not monitoring the feed.
No worries. So we're seeing it.
So it's peff.com/MMM. And I'm taking advantage of the situation. You have to like that page in order to access the files. But that's the direct link to the file download page.
Very cool.
And we'll go back to, so now I've shown you guys the basic gist of the analyzer here, and now the idea is for you to go and kind of experiment with the different devices, look at the different outputs, connect them into the analyzer, and then, learn for yourself, get a better idea of of what the behavior is that's going on. And the thing to remember out of all of this is that, again, control voltages, they're universal signals. You can wire them up any way you want. All that's different is the actual behavior of the control voltages. And so what I've done here on this list, there are 8 different behaviors that I've listed. Note CVs, which are unipolar. That's what the little positive sign means, that it only has a positive value. Gate CVs, which are the pulses, the light switches. Again, only a positive unipolar value. Curve CVs, which are variable, programmable. They can be unipolar or bipolar. They can have both positive and or negative values. LFOs are typically bipolar, and they're variable, depends on the device. And in that category of LFOs, that's the Thor LFOs, that's the subtractor LFOs, that's the Maelstrom modulators. So again, but they generally do this function as the same purpose. They are generating a periodic changing waveform. Envelope generator CVs, again, only positive. Envelope follower CVs, which if I have time, I'll get into. Spider CVs, which the spider is the splitter device, which I showed you how you can split the signal and invert signals. MIDI controller CVs, which are going back to that question about MIDI notes to CVs. That's the RPG8 as a MIDI converter. The only one that I've left off here is pitch to control voltage, which would be Neptune and record. So again, you have all these devices. But if you break it down with this list, you can pretty much understand, what each one of the sockets is doing, right? There's only a handful of different types of control voltages that you need to understand, and this is basically it. You don't have to go through, memorize every socket on every device in order to fully understand control voltages. And this kind of opens things up because now you're less worried about technical aspects of what's going on, and just more, you can think more about the application of control voltages. Okay, so let's actually get into some stuff here. Now, the thing about control voltages is their purpose. Like, why do we even have these things, right? Basically, control voltages are designed to automatically change things. Your hands are busy on the keyboard, or you're on the mouse, and you don't have the ability to go and change a parameter all the time, constantly throughout your track. That's when you would use a control voltage. All right. The other thing to remember is that control voltages can change several things at the same time. So 2 kind of important rules. So if you have a situation where you think, I need something to change this, throughout the song, I need an LFO, or I need an envelope generator, or I need a gate, that's when you employ this. And unfortunately, this frame is not going to work as well without annotations, but I just want to go back to this block diagram of a synthesizer and show you how you're already using control voltages in like the subtractor or Thor. The idea is we start on the lower left here and on the keyboard. So like when you press a key on the keyboard, the keyboard actually generates 2 control voltages. It creates a stepped CV, and that value gets sent to the oscillator, and it determines a pitch. So if you're pressing C, that control voltage is telling the oscillator, play a C note, right? At the same time, you have the gate pulse. You have the light switch when you press the keyboard, and that's turning on a signal. That's sending a pulse to the next on the lower right-hand 2 boxes, the envelope generators. So that pulse is triggering those envelope generators, and then in turn, the envelope generators are creating lazy gate signals, pulses, envelopes, which open the filter and simultaneously raise and lower the level of the amplifier. So, and I should, so if you can generally get an idea of what's going on when you press a keyboard. Where am I going with this? Oh, yeah. So we're not really, there are actually several different processes going on when you press that key and play a note on a subtractor. And I just wanted to put this up there to kind of illustrate that even though you don't think you're using control voltages, in essence, every time you use a Thor patch and an XT patch, there's something at work or something at play in this setup. So when we get into more of these esoteric uses of control voltages and reason, we're doing something like this. We're taking a patch cord from an LFO and dragging it over and having it control a filter. Or we're taking a matrix, having it control the amplifier, or having a Maelstrom modulator control the pitch. And you can see, like, pardon me a second. Okay. What I've done here is I've tried to characterize the different types of modulations. LFO going to a filter, that's like a filter sweep. And then a matrix going and controlling your synthesizer, controlling the oscillator pitch or controlling the triggers to the envelope generator. So that's your step sequence. Maelstrom modulator controlling pitch, that's what we call vibrato. Or if we take a matrix curve CV down on the lower right and have it control the level of the amplifier, that's a gating effect. So hopefully this is starting to come together for you guys, just to give you a general understanding of, the mindset, perhaps, of how you have to think about these things. But let's maybe get into some of the more important things. Oh, yeah, here's the list of everything that will receive a control voltage signal. And it's basically everything. And then on the right-hand column, the M-class equalizer, stereo imager, compressor, maximizer, compo 1 compressor, the matrix, line 6 bass amp, the ID8. Those specific devices do not have voltage inputs. But if you put them in a combinator, you can route the input into the combinator and you're good to go. I'll leave that up for a second. But yeah, everything else, pretty much everything else, has the ability to receive a control voltage. And off the top of my head, I don't know exactly what some of these things will do. Like, I don't have it burned into my brain that connecting a control voltage, or what the result would sound like if I connected an LFO into a phaser. Remember, half the battle is experimenting and trying to discover what is the right combination for your track or in context of your track. But just having the general knowledge that, I can do this and it's possible that it might work. Like, should I run an envelope generator to the pen pot or something like that, so that each time I trigger the note, it automatically sweeps from left to right or from right to left? Would that be the right modulation? Just the fact that you can do that kind of gives you the ability to explore different production techniques. But you don't, like I said, you don't know what it's going to really sound like until you get into it and actually experiment with it on your own.